I guess Emily's going to say some words first before I say anything. Okay.
Sure. You can, here, you've got it, all right, it is best for accessibility practices to use the microphone. Hi, I'm Emily, I'm the library manager. Thank you so much for coming out today. A lot of Michael heads in the audience here. You all know Michael Ferri, my friend. He's also on the board of our wonderful historical society, and we are so excited to hear him talk today about the cultural history of Santa Claus. And this is your 5th year giving this presentation, number 5. So very cool. And newly updated for 2024. I understand a lot of work has gone into the slides, so thank you so much. And then I don't think we're gonna have this problem, but this is a lecture for adults. And Michael tells me we have some adult content. And the other thing about it is that we are going to talk about the entire history of Santa Claus, everything behind the myth. So that is why it's for adults today. So we are so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for coming, and give Michael a big round of applause.
Yay!
Well, again, thank you for showing up. This is it's been an experience for me over the last, 5 years, and that sort of got started when Jim gave me a book about Santa, and I never really gave up belief in Santa Claus, I have to admit. I mean, he's still here, you know, and I think he's here hopefully with everybody in their heart, and he's become such a cultural icon, and in doing the research, it's like this cultural icon goes back literally to the Stone Age, the end of the Stone Age, the Neolithic Stone Age, the New Stone Age. And that's where he starts his journey. And he's still with us. I mean, it's an enduring image, an enduring icon of our culture. And the culture, when I say our culture, I mean Northern European. He came out mostly out of that culture, and we'll get into that. So here we go. So there he is in all of his glory. This is our modern view of who this wonderful man is. And one in the middle is from a Macy's parade recently. And well, you'll see the changes that he's gone through over the millennia. He's also a saint and of the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. So I always was wondering, what was this thing about Saint Nicholas, and then looking back at this guy. I mean, he doesn't particularly look like a bishop of Myra or Bari in Italy. He looks really different. So it's like, that's one of the questions we're going to explore today. And then there's this guy. He enters into Santa's tree, his genealogy tree. And this is the part that for me was a big discovery when I started doing the research. These guys go back literally to the Stone Age. This is where it all begins. And this is Santa's tree, his family tree. You can see all of the various cultural elements that came together that created this wonderful character. We're having trouble with this.
It's just glare. No, it's leaving.
Oh, it's doing this again, Michael. Here.
There it is. I think this is it. This is where it all started. The ancestors, our ancestors, if we come from Northern Europe, and my family, biological family, came from the British Isles, all and a little German and a little Norwegian and whatever thrown in on the side. So it all started with the indigenous cultures of Europe, and that's where you see corded wear. They don't really know a lot about those folks, but the people over on the left, the Yamnaya culture, they started migrating into that part of the Western Europe. And that's where we had the hunter-gatherers and the farmer cultures mixed. And the original indigenous folks were matriarchal. So their gods were mostly women, and they saw the land being in harvest sort of ruled by the female matriarchy. There was also a sense, and this is what is where we get our guys from, excuse me. The sense of the people that lived there first, they did not conceive of nature as a human god, like the Greeks thought of Zeus up in the sky. It was more akin to a spirit, an entity that they were a part of, and it was found in the deep forest. And they were spiritually connected to that deity, and they were part of it. Whereas we sort of, in our later cultures, it came later, sort of looked at it as a sky god that looked down on earth, and so forth. So this is what they thought of that. I'm going to call him the wild man because his sex was changed along the way. The people that came from around the Caspian Sea were patriarchal warrior cultures. So they brought with them gods that were male. And so the two mixed and the male gods won out. And so the concept of deep nature became a male, not a female. And they called him the wild man or the beast man. The wild man was an awesome creature, hair-covered, humpbacked, and bestial. As storms raged, he added to the fury by shaking and uprooting trees. As a creature of storm and fury, he loved thunderstorms and thunder and lightning. Now remember, thunder and lightning in German are Donder and Blitzen. Oh, interesting. Okay. Most of the time, he lived peacefully in the woods among his beloved animals. But when his anger was aroused, he was fierce and his wrath terrifying. The wild man was more than a demon of storm, fury, and destructiveness. He was also responsible for birth, growth, and fertility of all life. His goodwill was invaluable. He cared for the forest animals hunted by humanity and was willing to advise and help human beings. Upon his life and yearly death, whose cycle of life depended on it, the wild man was the link to the unknown and the uncontrollable. He was the vessel through which life flowed to the people and the land. He was the conduit of divine power, the God-humanity connection. It is apparent that in the very earliest wild man rituals conducted by tribal shamans, that people believed that their god of nature embodied the mysterious forces that kept nature in balance and maintained the cycle of life and the seasons. That was fairly long, but I just wanted to give you a sense of how those folks saw that concept of nature. And it was something that they depended on all the time. I mean, not only for the fertility of the land, but for their own personal human fertility and the fertility of the animals.
And what kind of years were those? About
Those would have been the end of the Stone Age, Neolithic, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. Now, within those cultures, there were people who were the intermediaries between them and the gods or the forces of nature, and they were the shamans. We've heard about them. Some people may call them priests and so forth. But the shamans were the people that were there for the people every day. And the concept is, in terms of their own power, it's sort of like when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, we believed that the true body and blood of Christ was there in the host. That was the miracle of transubstantiation. Well, with the pagan people, their concept was when the shaman, or either the man or the woman shaman, put on the regalia of her shaman, the horns and the skins and so forth, that person was channeling and became the god. So it was a real presence in their community. It wasn't something that was out there. It was right there in front of them when they did the rituals. And then the Indo-Europeans around the Caspian Sea, around areas like where Russia are today, Ukraine, when those people moved in, they brought with them their gods. And these are our immediate ancestors. This is where all of the different languages that we speak in this room probably and our ancestors spoke came from. The Scandinavian language, the English language, Italian, Greek, German, all of these folks divided up from the Indo-Europeans when they moved west. And these are some of the gods that they brought with them. The one on the left is Freyr from the Scandinavia. The middle one is Saturn from Rome. And then there's next one over is Pan, who was a Greco-Roman, both Greeks and Romans. And then we even had goddesses, Frau Holla from Germany. And the one in the middle is the Celtic gods that they brought, Cernunnos. And then there's, of course, the one we might be all a little more familiar with is the Holly King from Great Britain and the Celtic tribes there. And then there is Demeter from Greece and Dionysus with the grape harvest and then eventually Odin. The setting for our story really takes place just around this time of year. This was the time when it was cold, it was hard life, being warm inside and so forth was going on, and it was very dreary, snow and everything. One thing that was going on good was that the harvest had been finished. And once the harvest was finished, the food supply, that was the best time of the year for them to enjoy food. They had an abundance. And as time went on, that supply would run out and so forth. But right now, at this time of the year, when the solstice happens, that's when it's time to not only enjoy all the food, but to sit back and relax, because you've got a moment where you're tending all your fields and so forth. And so you get a chance to rest. And so the harvest was a big deal, harvest time. And of course, this is, the harvest was a time for frivolity, and remember these are fertility gods. So their concept of sexuality was much different than we have in our modern day culture. So Saturnalia was just outrageous, by our standards. There was public drunkenness, everybody was carousing. They would go out in the field and have sex, and that was their way of helping the fertility of the fields and so forth. And it was an established custom. And actually, this custom is still with us today, in varying degrees, of course. Now, at this point in time, the church, at the time it was the Universal Catholic Church. Protestantism had not come along yet. But this is when Christianity enters the stage of history. The Roman Emperor Constantine chose Christianity to be the religion of his empire. He felt it would keep the empire together, and this is how he was going to consolidate power. And so the main competition at that time were various other gods that were basically sun gods. Mithras was one of the big ones, and Sol Invictus was another one. And so eventually Christianity triumphs over paganism in terms of it became the dominant religion of the Empire of Rome. even though at the time there were maybe 20% of the people in the empire were actually Christians. There were still millions and millions of people who were not. And, but it did become eventually the only sanctioned religion in the empire. And you'll notice when we see images of Jesus these days, we see a halo around his head. And that was present very early on in the church. And it was a way of identifying the Christian God with the old sun gods. So the halos really, when you see them, are really sun images. And that gave credence to the new religion. Now, Pope Julius came along and he decided that they were going to set the birthday of Jesus as December 25th. This happened to be the same time that the Romans were celebrating their harvest festival, the Saturnalia. So many people say, well, they did that on purpose so they could try to wean Christians away. Well, there's a lot of research now that says, no, there were other reasons why they chose that date. I don't know whether they were happy eventually or they weren't, or unhappy that they chose the date of that thing of being in competition with the celebrations of Saturnalia. But whatever happened, it did occur, and so when Christ's birthday was being celebrated, the pagans were in the streets with all of their frivolity, and you can imagine the conflicts that arose from that. The church attempted to stamp out paganism in the countryside. Christianity was mostly concentrated in the big cities at the time. So the people in the country who were close to the land did not see the Christian message in the same way as the people in the city. People in the city, many of them were slaves, and they were poor, and they had a different relationship to that new religion. People in the country, they were concerned about who's going to grow the crops, what's going to make the crops grow. And they depended on the gods that they had followed for centuries and millennia. So then in every culture in Europe had this, as the paganism was being tried, they were trying to stamp it out. They really weren't that successful in the beginning. And so every culture in Europe had its wild man god. Each one's a little different, but it was basically the same concept. And in some places they were wild women, who were the people that were growing the crops. And but the people really were not willing to give up the old gods. And they watched over their animals, ensured their physical survival, and it was just something they did not think that Christianity could fulfill for them. So they held on to those old gods quite well. They had secret gatherings at night, away from the church officials, They had secret gatherings at night, and they would have their rituals and so forth. And many of the priests of the new religion were priests that had been present in the old religion. So you had a lot of pagan priests who converted, and yet when they converted, they still really weren't totally Christianized. So a lot of the teachings were mixed in. And of course, the harvest festivals continued, no matter what. Excessive drinking, and all sorts of raucous and bawdy things. And this is really getting the church folks upset, to say the least. It was a real pill. And especially when they see it as based on pagan beliefs. So it's not only just maybe lewd and immoral, it's heresy. It's breaking the laws of God. Now you remember, if you think about the devil as we know him in the Christian culture, he was an angel, a fallen angel, and he was beautiful. He was an angel, he had wings, and all the angels were beautiful. Well, at some point, the Pope, Gregory, decided that he would change the physical description of Lucifer, the angel. And he changed him, and he just started describing these two gods over here on the right. And that would be Pan, who we all know probably just from mythology, and the other one is Cernunnos, who was in Gaul and Europe. So he changed. That's where we got our image of what the devil is. They took the image of the old gods, and they said, this really is the Christian devil we've been talking about. And aren't you terrible to have, be worshiping this devil? And so that's one of the issues I always was wondering about when you think of Lucifer as an angel, and then all of a sudden you see this horned character, and you'd say, well, how did he get here? Well, the Pope actually changed it. He made it look like that. So this was the new face of evil in the world, which is still around. So in their efforts to continue to stamp out this devotion to the pagans, they chanced upon the man named St. Nicholas, the saint who lived over in present-day Turkey. And he was a very beloved saint. He was a wonderful saint. I grew up Catholic, and St. Nicholas was just one of those good guys that he did all these wonderful things. He performed miracles. He threw money into a house that didn't have enough money to have a dowry for their 3 daughters, and 3 daughters were going to be sold to into slavery or prostitution. He brought some kids back from who had been killed by been butchered and pickled. I don't know what they were doing quickly, but he actually brought them back to life. And he was also the patron saint of sailors. Some of the academics say that St. Nicholas's church was built on top of a pagan temple to Poseidon, who was the god of the sea. So even the Catholic Church has gotten around to saying that maybe St. Nicholas didn't really exist, but in those days he was really taken very seriously and so forth. And so he was offered as a new alternative image to the old pagan fertility god. And the church sent around traveling morality plays. They tried to say, well, we've got to somehow convince the people, to wean them away from the old gods. So they'd have these morality plays that would come to town, and everybody loved them because it was entertainment, and there wasn't much in those days. So you can see here the St. Nicholas is sitting in a throne, and he has the old pagan god in front of him, and he's giving him a moral lesson, and hopefully this is going to convince people that he's really an evil person. They were morality plays. Well, the thing of it is that the people were still holding on to their old pagan ways, and he became the hit of the show. And it was very interesting. He would have all these crazy antics, and every time he came on stage, there was an announcement from somebody in the stage that the wild man is coming on, and his introductory line would be, "Ho, ho, ho." And that's where "ho, ho, ho" comes from. That was his introduction to come on the stage. That was sort of like his cue. So the church continued to try to, well, again, the morality plays didn't really work to the satisfaction of the church officials. So finally, the 11th and 12th century, the church had amassed enough secular power that they tried to enforce their ban on paganism, which they linked at that point to witchcraft and heresy. And many of the people were suppressed physically, witches were burned, and towns were wiped out and so forth. So it was like the ultimate way of stamping out that. But that didn't work either. And they wanted to keep hold of their gods, and they trusted them more than the Christian God. And so they had to kind of come to a peaceful compromise, which was, you can have your wild man in the village ceremonies, but he has to be subservient to St. Nicholas. He becomes a servant of St. Nicholas. And so when St. Nicholas was making his rounds, giving out presents and visiting the children, which had become the custom for him, you will always see the wild man with him. And so our great pagan god has become basically a servant of the church. And so the church was happy enough with that. And they figured that's about as much as they could do, and they would just let Tom take care of the rest. And St. Nicholas was not always a nice man, in terms of the people that were playing him. He would go into a house, he had goodies, cookies and candies and cakes and so forth, and he would grill the kids about their catechism. Do you know the catechism number 1, 2, what's the Holy Trinity and all this and that? And in the beginning, he would switch them with a little switch if they didn't know their lessons. And so finally they realized that this was a little scandalous. They can't have good St. Nicholas, whipping the children into shape. So they said, okay, to the wild man, you go along with St. Nicholas and you do the whipping. St. Nicholas will be the good guy, and then the wild man, the old pagan god, will be the one that whips the children if they don't know their lessons. And then we had the Protestant Reformation. And you can see that's Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King. Martin Luther. Sorry, I'm so used to putting those Martin Luther. Anyway, that's Martin Luther the monk. And he said, no, we can't have, so the countries that became Protestant, he said, we can't have St. Nicholas bringing the goodies to the children. He's a Catholic saint. And they were at war. So what they said is, the one that's really bringing the presents is the Christ child. And they said, okay, that makes sense. And then they said, well, wait a minute, we can't have baby Jesus handing out presents. It doesn't look very dignified. And what can a little baby do, So they didn't think it out too well. So they invited an angel from heaven to come and help distribute the children's presents. And so you see the figure in the middle and the one here on the end. That's your old pagan god, wild man, riding around with what they call in Germany Christkindl. That's where we get our Kris Kringle from. So that's really the Christ child. And so the presents were distributed by the wild man. But the main point was that the presents come from the Christ child and not the pagan. Well, eventually the customs kept on changing, and our wild man really becomes more of I have to skip generations, because if I had to go every even 1,000 years, we'd be here all day. Anyway, the wild man separated on his own. He eventually then just started bringing around the presents and the goodies, and he's not really a god anymore. He's more of a folk character that everybody loves and everything, but he's still a little scary, and he scares people. So in each country, there was a wild man who became a cultural icon. And so we have Belschnickel over on the left, who's in Germany. And Belschnickel means in German, Ferri Nicholas. And so the name is there, but he doesn't quite look like the Saint Nicholas anymore. He's changed. And then there's next to Rupert in the middle from Germany, then the man riding the goat is Father Christmas in England, and then the two over here are from two French characters, Bohème Noël and Père Foutard. So you would see these guys bringing around presents, and they would come on the eve of St. Nicholas Day. St. Nicholas Day is the 6th of December, so their day was the 5th of December. So now we're going to get to America finally. So the question is, who's going to make it over across the ocean to America? So we got in America, the Pilgrims, they said, no, we don't want to have anything to do with Christmas. It's a pagan celebration. If you even try to have these little festivities and everything, we're going to put you in the stocks. We're going to fine you $1,000, which is really incredible. And they said no. So forget that. So we'll have to go down to Jamestown. It was more of an English colony of, it wasn't a religious colony. And so they had Father Christmas and the Lord of Misrule. So they continued the customs of frivolity, harvest celebration, all of the excesses of the day that were happening. Eventually, the Pilgrims gave way, and they lost power. So the whole country eventually followed really the concepts of the English, which was harvest festival and so forth. If you think of Thanksgiving, even that was the beginning of the season, and so the Pilgrims were willing to celebrate Thanksgiving, but not Christmas. And so what happened as time went on, a new tone was setting in about Christmas. People were saying these festivals were just getting out of hand. There was a growing middle class and upper class in the United States, and they were sick and tired of having all these raucous holidays. And some of the holidays, you would go back. Some of the holidays, the revelers, they were called, they would come to your house, knock on the door, and demand food. And I mean, it wasn't anything you could just sort of take lightly. If they didn't get their way, they could even make their way into your house. And there was all sorts of, sometimes they would destroy houses and everything. Remember, they're all drunk. Well, not all of it, a lot of them are drunk. And the class structure was such as that the people at the bottom of the class hierarchy it was their time of the year to ask from those above them for assistance and to give them treats and so forth. Because all the year they kept, their noses clean and did the bidding of the upper classes. And so it was time for us to get rewarded. And so the middle class were not happy about that. And neither were the things. So they made laws in every colony to try to stamp out all of the drunken behavior. And there was violence at times when people get drunk. And again, like I said, there was a new way of wanting to look at that. They wanted something that was more emphasis on children, families, and gift giving, and get away from the excessive stuff. So along comes Washington Irving, and he's one of our first authors who talks about a Santa Claus or St. Nicholas in America. He creates this Knickerbocker history, but it's all fantasy. It's a total fiction, and he portrays St. Nicholas as this very heavy-set fat Dutchman, and everybody started believing them, and a lot of people didn't realize that it was a fantasy. But he was in the movement to change the nature of Christmas, to make it more family-oriented. And he did his part, and he got people thinking about it. And this is the St. Nicholas, really, that was in Europe. The Dutch people had Sinterklaas, which is, some people say is where the word Santa Claus came from, a mispronunciation of the Dutch. Santa Claus, Sinterklaas. Well, they based besides the saint himself, they based him on the old Odin god. And Sinterklaas rode a white horse and carried a church staff. And that's Odin with his bag of goodies. And he had an 8-legged white horse. And so the two images in Holland merged to become that. This is the man that really, in a sense, set the tone for who our Santa Claus is. Clement Moore, he wrote A Visit from St. Nicholas, which he described, we all have heard this poem once from childhood. I mean, all of us know it. And again, but he calls him St. Nicholas. And it's like, well, wait a minute, this is not a St. Nicholas looking character riding there in the sleigh. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. So that's really not our Roman Catholic bishop hanging around, flying in a sleigh. So what the heck happened here? So did I turn it off?
I don't think so. I could have run out of battery. You want to use these ones? Does that work for you, okay?
Which one?
This,
Yeah, I can do that one.
St. Nicholas,
And that would be bad.
Well, that's not working either, is it?
How is it? So which?
Okay. I don't know. Magic.
It works. Okay, good, thank you. You're hereby deputized as a Christmas elf. So this is really the character that Clement Moore was describing. And dressed all in fur. The reindeers were picked up from the Scandinavians and the northern Germans probably. And he got these ideas from neighbors of his. At the time there, where he lived in New York City, there was a big German community. There was a big German community down in Pennsylvania. So they were the ones that really did bring the image of Santa Claus as one of the old wild men. Belschnickel is his name. He still roams the hills of Pennsylvania to this day. And this is our Santa Claus. They took the name of the Catholic bishop, but they gave him the look and the character of Belschnickel. And this is basically Belschnickel. He's the one there with the whip is a Belschnickel from Pennsylvania, and from around the early 1900s. And he would go around with goodies in his pockets and presents and so forth, and he'd both whip the bad children and be good to the good children. So he fulfilled the role of both gift giver and punisher. And some of you may recognize him from over here on the left, this plastic figure. that was the Santa Claus that I had when I was a kid. I lived in northwestern Virginia, near the Pennsylvania border. A lot of Pennsylvania Germans had moved into our county before I even was born, and they brought with them the Belschnickel. So my mother gave me one of those Belschnickel little statues. She didn't say the word Belschnickel at the time. She just said, "This is Santa." So that's the image I grew up with. And they were still Belschnickeling in Virginia in the early 1900s up until World War II, where they still, so my mother saw that character roaming around in Shenandoah Valley, where I came from. So somehow, I guess, then World War II came along and that he kind of lost his prominence and never returned. But still, in Pennsylvania, the Amish still have Belschnickel. And he goes around and does his business every year. Now this is the next one who kind of took that whole image of Santa and elaborated on it. Thomas Nast. He's from Germany. He was another German. He was a journalist and an artist. And everybody probably recognized the Santa on the left here, on the right here. That's classic Santa Claus. And that's when we really started filling in the blank spaces on what our version of Santa Claus looks like. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to make him civilized and middle class. And enough of this, roaming around with Donder and Blitzen in the sky and creating confusion and drunkenness and so forth. So Santa is very industrious, like a good Protestant, capitalist should be. He loved children. I mean, he didn't scare the children anymore. And he was even so cultured, he wrote music. I mean, he really was, they really did, good by him. He even was supporting the troops during the Civil War, the Northern troops. He was very patriotic. And he was very good at giving good advice to the parents. He told them how to, deal with their children and so forth. And so this is our Santa as we know him today, flying off into the sky with his delivery of foods. And of course, then along comes Coca-Cola. And the man there is Haddon Sundblom. And he created this Coca-Cola Santa, and this was probably, this was the last step in creating the image. And
was that when there was still cocaine in the Coke?
maybe, yeah, it might have been at the early times. That's what they told me. I think that's when I got addicted to Coca-Cola. I don't know.
Like he was looking at a mirror.
Yeah, he. This is the one that we really love, the big, fat, jolly guy and so forth. And our economy, capitalism, recognized the value in him, and they had him selling stuff. And that's an incredible boost in our economy. He sold cigarettes, he sold sugar plums, he sold beer. I mean, every department store in the early 1900s had a Santa Claus. I mean, it was just there. It was the way to bring the kids in, the way to bring the parents in, and so forth. And buy. I mean, that was the whole thing. So he was a bonanza for the economy, for sure. And he did this good part. He did charity work, and he was very good with the kids. And there he is again up on the Macy's parade, selling stuff. So, and eventually, though, we burned out on him a little bit. This one here on the right, it's like he has a gun pointing at you, hands up, he's saying. In other words, it just really got over-commercialized. And there was a danger of losing the message that the Christian church was reminding us of. So if you think about it, our old pagan god, who used to roam the forest and create storms and thunder and lightning, ends up finally coming to terms with the church that tried to stamp him out at one point. And he still lives in Europe. And he's actually making a comeback in the United States. There's 3 or 4, Krampus is the name he has in Austria. And so these are all visions, various versions of our wild man that, these are photos taken, you know, within the last, pardon?
Sasquatch.
Yeah, exactly.
Sasquatch.
They say there's a connection to that, yeah. And Austria, Bulgaria, and Germany. And that the red figure, that's the first time I saw the image of the wild man, and I was trying to figure out who he was, and that's when I started doing the research too. You know, the club he has is not really a club, it's really a phallic symbol. And so when you see the devil with a club or a pointed tail, it really means something a little more obvious. And but you know, the Europeans now, he is a big, when they talk about him, they explain him as a folk hero. Well, that's what he's become. He's become a folk hero. And but he's still going strong. In Russia, he's called the Father Frost. And they really do these elaborate, wonderful costumes and have bull horns and so forth. And he is in parts of Europe still making the rounds, giving out presents. The St. Nicholas figure with the Christkindl, that's the angel. So that's a mixture of Dutch and German traditions together. And then there's the 2 in the middle, and there's the Christkindl. That's what the children grow up with now in Germany. That's the one who brings the presents. And then that's Sweden over there with Santa Lucia. She somehow made her way from Italy to Scandinavia, and I still haven't figured that one out. But she's big in Scandinavia, and she is really basically directly descended from the old ancient mother goddess, Frau Hulda. And then in the middle, for those of us who are of any Danish or Scandinavian, that's the Nisse. These are the folks that actually became Santa's elves in mythology. They may not like it. They tried to say it was the Sami people from Finland up, the reindeer people, but they said, no, we're not the Santa's elves. And I think the Nisse have kind of accepted that role, so with the little red hats and so forth. So they figure into it. So as you can see, I mean, everybody had a hand in this. Every culture has had a hand in creating this image. And finally, Santa, and this is one I just found. I just love this image. Santa and the old pagan god have finally come to terms, and they've become good buddies. And I just think that's wonderful. I just wanted to tell you about this. You know, Santa and I go way back. I don't know if you know that. I met him when I was around 3 years old, and we just became good friends. And I've kind of kept in touch with him spiritually over the years. And finally, a few years ago, what?
Is that a picture?
Yeah, that's me. That's me. And I met Santa on a train one time going to Leavenworth, and he had one of his elves to take a picture of us, and he sent me the picture, and he autographed. He said, "To Michael, thanks for helping to make me famous." I just wanted to show you that Santa Claus is still around. We still are in touch, and he's still doing a good job, and keep taking care of people and making people happy. So there we go.